Hello and welcome to Dialogue. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, who took office in early June, has recently appointed ministers in key roles including defense, foreign affairs, and unification. His election follows a period of political instability triggered by his predecessor's failed attempt to impose martial law. What does Lee's victory and cabinet selection signal for South Korea's future? What major challenges lie ahead for the new administration? And how will President Lee navigate relations with key neighbors and allies? To take a closer look at these issues, I earlier spoke with Professor Moon Chung-in at Yonsei University and former special advisor to the South Korean president for unification, diplomacy, and security, and vice chairman of the Asia-Pacific Leadership Network for Nuclear Non-proliferation and Disarmament. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to Dialogue, Dr. Moon. So let's start with President Lee. Of course, he's a veteran, but outside of this country, probably a lot of our viewers are not that familiar with him. Please introduce us, what kind of leadership leader he is.
I would say he's a miracle. He was born in a very poor rural family. He just went to elementary school, and he didn't go to middle school and high school. Instead, he was going to factory as a young factory workers. While working at the factory in the daytime, he worked very hard in the evening, and he passed the special examination to college entrance and get into college and study law. And then he also passed the bar examination, which is the most competitive examination in Korea. And then become a lawyer, and then he became a community activist in city of Seongnam. And later he became mayor of Seongnam City for 8 years. Then he became governor of Gyeonggi province for 4 years. And then he became the president of opposition party, Korea, the Democratic Party of Korea. And then he ultimately became, president of the Republic of Korea. Therefore, if you look at his past trajectory, his transformation is really miraculous transformation. He started from the bottom. Therefore, in Korean word, even Chinese, you have a similar word saying he was a dragon out of ditch.
That's indeed a miracle, and for personal struggle, in terms of politics, he's a fighter. In last presidential election, he was stabbed basically in his neck. And of course, now he's the president. What about his politics, like his philosophy in terms of governing this country, the economy, relationship, peace and war issues?
A lot of his opponents criticize his ideologue. He's too much progressive, okay? But in reality, he's extremely pragmatic person. And I would describe him as let's say, progressive pragmatist, or just, a realistic pragmatist. Therefore, his interest is in problem solving, okay? And he also abides by democratic procedures too. He loves debating, okay? And solving the problems through the consultation and persuasion. Therefore, I think he will be a very good inner leader, because he is the only leader of South Korea who became president from the community leader all the way to mayor of the small city, and then governor of the Gyeonggi province, the largest province in Korea. Therefore, he will be different from other leaders in the sense that he has first-hand knowledge of administration. Therefore, he will be able to, convince Korean people.
If you look at the numbers in recent couple of years, in particular, less than half a year of this year, we see the economy is performing not that strong. That obviously is a challenge for the president.
Yes, economy is the number one challenge. Feeding the people and making people happy.
For every
it all
country,
comes
right?
from the economy. But first, we had this martial law fiasco. Okay, that really, depressed, ordinary people's, economy. Okay, and also then we have a tariff war coming from the United States. Okay, And also we are, really competing with the major countries in cutting edge sectors such as semiconductor sectors. But we haven't come up with a sufficient investment in the semiconductor area and artificial intelligence. Therefore, Lee Jae-myung has really daunting challenges of overcoming the depressed economy on the one hand, and enhancing competitiveness on the other hand. And plus, he should be dealing with President Trump in these tariff negotiations. Okay? Therefore, all these things conjured up together, it will be a major challenge to President Lee Jae-myung.
There's a lot at the plate right now. What is he likely to do with economy? I mean, in terms of policy making domestically, to stabilize the economy, to promote the growth of the economy. I mean, of course, on the other hand, he will deal with Trump's tariffs. But domestically, what kind of policy are we expecting?
You can see him as a Keynesian structuralist. Therefore, he strongly believes in the role of government in boosting the economy, stimulating the economy through the physical and monetary means. Therefore, his basic idea is a so-called the basic income policy. Therefore, government, when economy is depressed, and when the economy is stagnant, then government should release lots of money
like
to
a stimulus program.
Yes, as a way of stimulating economy. Therefore, for example, he proposed the so-called local currency. Okay, but it is not that it is not the so-called differential distribution of a welfare benefit depending upon the income level or wealth level. What he's saying is just outright universal basic income to the people, which would be guaranteed by the government, so that people can use those vouchers in market, and that will boost the economy. That is his one approach. Okay. Another approach is with regard to the enhancement of competitiveness. He singled out the semiconductor chips and artificial intelligence, and he's trying to pull together large fund, not mostly from the government, but from the civil society and the economy and foreign sectors too, so that he can pump those funds into semiconductor and artificial intelligence sector. Therefore, he has a lot of innovative ideas, but he will confront a lot of opposition too, because a lot of conservatives argue that his approach is a Marxian approach, a radical progressive approach. Okay, and he will ruin the Korean economy. Therefore, we have all the Milton Friedman's monetarist school and this Lee Jae-myung's Keynesian school. They are competing each other in Korean society.
Okay, politics, some politics at least there.
Yes.
And in terms of the tariff, of course, how big a headache is Trump's tariff for South Korea? We know like 25% for Korea, of course, base like tariff 10%, and now 50% for steel export.
Yes, first of all, United States account for about 19% of South Korean export. Okay, now American share is larger than the Chinese share. There's a big change. Okay, therefore our dependence in U.S. is big.
Yeah, export.
Therefore, if the United States impose tougher tariffs on South Korea, it is natural that South Korea will suffer lots. But if you look at the President Trump's, idea is this: he has imposed 10% universal tariff and 25% reciprocal tariffs,
right.
And also he added specialized item specific tariffs on automobile, steel, and aluminum. Okay, therefore, it's a huge tariffs on South Korea. But if you look at the actual figures, okay, yes, we are enjoying surplus in commodity trade, but we are suffering from deficit in service trade.
Service trade.
And plus, we are buying American weapons, quite large sum of American weapons. And also, South Korea was the #1 foreign investment country in the U.S. for the past 4 years. Altogether, about South Korean firms invested about $140 billion in the U.S., okay? And also we'll be buying American natural gas. And if you combine them all together, U.S. is benefiting from us rather than we benefiting the United States.
Right.
And also, I think our government is willing to make a concession on the removing some non-tariff barriers, okay? But even existing account, okay, U.S. is in better position than South Korea. Therefore, I think that, I think the Lee Jae-myung government will make a very tough negotiation with the United States. But the problem with the Trump administration is this: President Trump himself alluded that he would link defense cost sharing with this tariff negotiation. Therefore,
what does that mean?
That means there is a so-called agreement between Washington and Seoul called the Special Measures Agreement, according to which South Korea pays about $1.1 billion to American forces stationed in South Korea.
Yeah.
But President Trump is insisting that the South Korea should pay at least $10 billion.
10 times.
Nine times more.
9 times more the current.
Yeah, but unless you change the Special Measures Agreement, and the Special Measures Agreement should pass through the National Assembly. Otherwise, the South Korean government cannot allocate any money. Therefore, the U.S. and South Korea cannot link it to tariff negotiation. That will be another big issue between the U.S. and South Korea.
People would assume one of the top priorities of the new government is policy on the DPRK, the North Korean side. Of course, if you look at the views of the candidates before the election, they have different views. So what is the idea of Mr. Lee in terms of handling a relationship with the North?
President Lee Jae-myung's number one priority is avoid the war, okay? Ensure peace. He once said, dirty peace is far better than winning war. Therefore, for him, peace is a primary emphasis in his policy, management. Therefore, for him, how to reduce tension with North Korea, how to rebuild the confidence with North Korea, how to restore these broken channels of communication with North Korea, those will be the very, very important issues. And also, even under the constraints of international sanction regime, he wanted to resuscitate exchange and cooperation with North Korea. In that way, he can avoid war and he can build more trust with North Korea. That is his basic policy on North Korea. I don't know whether North Korea will respond to that proposal or not, but he made the most visible action. Okay? He banned sending of propaganda leaflets to North Korea by North Korean defectors.
Which is seen as a provocative.
That was the primary source of grievances coming from North Korea. Therefore, he stopped it. But still, North Korea made it very clear. Now, 2 years ago, Kim Jong-un declared that the inter-Korean relationship is no longer special relationship in the direction of unification, but inter-Korean relations are, hostile two-state relations. Okay, and he even argued that whoever has a power in South Korea, be it progressive or conservative, South Korean authorities always interested in overthrowing regime in North Korea. Therefore, what he was saying, I think what he's saying is very simple and straightforward. Look, now North Korea is a DPRK, South Korea ROK, we are two separate states. States. South Korea and the ROK, DPRK respect international law. What is international law? Respect mutual territory, mutual sovereignty, and don't interfere with domestic affairs. Okay, it's like John Lye's 5 peace principles.
Peaceful principle. Is that accepted by the South? Do you think people say, fine, if this is a new reality, okay, we'll accept the new reality and follow and obey, the international laws or rules where there is?
Extreme right-wing people strongly opposed. We should achieve unification through absorbing North Korea. But extreme left progressive argue that unification is our existential goal. We cannot give it up. Without having unification, we don't have any raison d'etre of being Korean. But in between, the middle of the road people, they want to accept it. But again, talking about giving up unification, it's like a taboo in South Korea. The issue of unification is emotionally intertwined with domestic political ethos. Therefore, it will be very, very difficult, because if we wanted to accommodate North Korean demand and to turn hostile relationship into peaceful and cooperative relationship, then I think the Republic of Korea should amend Article 3 of the Constitution, which stipulate that the territory of the Republic of Korea includes the entire Korean Peninsula and its adjunct islands.
It's one country.
Therefore, DPRK cannot accept it. But I doubt that there would be nobody that would come up with that issue and make it public and engage in public debate on the constitutional amendment.
Right.
But otherwise, North Korea is very unlikely to come forth and have a dialogue with South Korea.
Yeah. Is there any possibility of like major players, beside North Korea, South Korea, U.S., China, Russia, Japan, is there any role they can play? Let's work together to maintain at least peace and stability in this region.
In fact, President Lee Jae-myung had a 30-minute telephone conversation with President Xi Jinping. Both agree that China will play a very important role in bringing denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and ensuring peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. China can play that role. And I personally hope that President Trump would have a direct talk with Chairman Kim Jong-un, as he did in the past. So that such a kind of direct summit talks between Trump and Kim Jong-un may open up the new, breakthrough to stir inter-Korean relations and DPRK-U.S. relations. And maybe Putin of Russia can play some role, but again, as a result of the war in Ukraine, Putin is very much kind of marginalized. Therefore, it will be very difficult for President Putin to play that kind of role. Japan, both former Prime Minister Kishida and current Prime Minister Ishiba all trying to improve ties with North Korea to solve the kidnapped Japanese issues. But again, if Japan can have direct talk with North Korea, that can also facilitate inter-Korean dialogue too.
Right.
Therefore, for me, be it China, the U.S. or Japan, if they engage with North Korea, come up with a mood for dialogue and rapprochement, that will be very, very positive for peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula.
Yeah, because peace and stability is in everybody's interest in this region. You mentioned the President Xi's phone conversation with President Lee, of course. So this important relationship, China, Korea, obviously. In the conversation, President Xi described the ties between the two countries as close neighbors that cannot be separated. He added that the two sides should respect each other's core interests and major concerns. What's your reading of President Xi's message here?
China and Republic of Korea just next to each other. You cannot redraw geography. Okay?
Right.
I'm being very honest with you. China is a big country and too near to us. How can we antagonize China? And also China has so many neighboring countries. Okay, at least 14 countries on ground,
Neighbors, yeah.
And how China can make each neighbor antagonist against China.
Exactly.
Therefore, China and neighboring countries are destined to cooperate each other. In order to cooperate, there got to be mutual respect, and the principle of equality should prevail. Okay, and I think the President Xi Jinping made that message very clearly.
Very clear.
And also, there's another very interesting point too. President Xi Jinping strongly urged President Lee Jae-myung that China and Republic of Korea should work together to promote free trade and multilateral order. And I think that is really welcome remark for entire South Koreans, because South Korea is a trading state. Okay, free trade and multilateral trading regime are blessing for us. Okay, as you can see, current debate with the United States, if strong country like United States impose unilateral measures against
in a unilateral manner against other countries,
smaller country like South Korea, we have no choice but to comply with it. But if other countries can work together, create a multilateral order in which mutually accepted rules, norms, and principles prevail, then mutually beneficial is a win-win outcome.
Right. Okay. That is true. And of course, the presidency mentioned about this, both sides should respect each other's core interests and major concerns. I think one thing here reminds me, of course, the Taiwan question. Previous administration under President Yoon, his remarks, for example, is like more aligned with the U.S. position in terms of following a U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, to contain China over the Taiwan question. And his remarks on Taiwan question is a bit controversial, to say the least, for Beijing. And now, are we going to see like a, public announcement or public reaffirmation of the One China policy, One China principle from the new administration?
When we normalize diplomatic ties with China, we decided to adopt One China policy. That One China policy means what? Taiwan is an integral part of People's Republic of China. Therefore, he will honor that One China policy. Okay, and also, even Yoon Sung-yeol was extremely pro-American with regard to Taiwan. When he was asked by the press people that if there is a crisis across the Taiwan Strait, are you going to make a military involvement? He said no. We have a North Korean threat. How can we divert our forces to Taiwan? If Yoon Sung-yeol makes the statement, made the statement, then you can expect what kinds of answer you can get from President Lee Jae-myung.
Yes, of course, this is the key national interest of the Chinese side. There's only one China. Taiwan is part of China. Any change to that, of course, that will cause trouble in this region.
But here you got to understand one thing very clearly. Our former President Yoon Sung-yeol pursued the value diplomacy. For him, value was more important than national interest. Okay, therefore he was in a sense ideologue, idealist.
Yeah.
But Lee Jae-myung, national interest prevails over values.
Yeah.
For him, what matters is people's interest, not value. Therefore, as long as he adheres to that pragmatic principle, and I think that he will not undermine Chinese core interest.
Yes, that's of course, that's a solid foundation, important foundation for bilateral relationship here. And when we speak of Taiwan question, speak of the U.S. military presence in South Korea, we know that original purpose was, of course, to using the U.S. words to deter any possible military movement from North Korea. But now there's people in Washington suggesting U.S. might let's say move some of that military presence for the purpose of continuing China, leaving South Korea alone to deal with North Korea. And of course, not long ago, the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, speaking in Shangri-La dialogue, he mentioned about U.S. allies should increase the military spending to match what European countries do now, like 5% of GDP. He also talked about his idea is against more trade with China. Like China is the largest trading partner of basically every country in Asia. How is that message received in South Korea?
Yeah, I think the Lee Jae-myung government is expecting that kind of bilateral pressures coming from Washington, but Lee Jae-myung will make a decision on the basis of national interest which he believes is beneficial to the Korean people. Okay? You know, it is not the United States, but the Korean people who make their own destiny and their own, policies.
Yeah.
And also a lot of people in South Korea do not want the South Korea become the forefront line of the new Cold War. Okay. Yes, U.S. can take out or take in American forces in South Korea. Okay. In accordance with strategic flexibility, U.S. can move around their forces anywhere in the world. Okay. But U.S. cannot force South Korea to take side with the United States to fight against China. But a lot of South Koreans will be very, very hesitant, even they will oppose that kinds of pressures. Because they do not want any kinds of military confrontation in Northeast Asia. They all want China and the U.S. live harmoniously, peacefully. That is the best interest, that is in the best interest of Korean people.
Another major economy, major regional countries here is Japan. Relationship with Japan, how will it look like under President Lee?
President Lee made it very clear, okay, he will honor the previous government's promises with the Japanese government, okay? However, he wants more sincere attitude from the Japanese side. Okay, for example, there is an issue of forced labor workers during the Japanese colonial period. Korean Supreme Court made a verdict saying that the Japanese firms, such as Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Shin Nippon Steel, they should reparate for those victims. But the Japanese firms refused to pay. Okay, and then Yonsei government, after discussing with the Japanese government, Yonsei government created a special fund for the compensation of those, Korean victims during the Japanese colonial period.
By the South Korean side.
But all South Korean firms, particularly POSCO, Pohang Steel Corporation, was the primary donor, and also some, Korea Federation of Industry and some industry associations, but not a single penny from Japan.
From Japan.
Okay.
No.
Therefore, now President Lee Jae-myung will be arguing that the Japan also make contribution to that fund. Okay.
That's reasonable.
Reasonable, but as for the territory issue, like a Dokdo issue, he will not make any concession. He will make a very strong, protest if Japan continue to claim its entitlement to, Dokdo Takeshima. Okay.
I mean, it's difficult to solve this sovereign issue.
But on other issues, economy, security, culture, he's willing to cooperate with Japan. But however, President Lee Jae-myung will be placing a lot of emphasis on, China, Japan, South Korea trilateral cooperation. He may push for the final settlement of trilateral FTAs. China, Japan, South Korean FTAs.
Thank you, Dr. Moon. With that, we come to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks again to Dr. Moon. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.